Hello and welcome to Speightstown, a forgotten treasure. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I do appreciate the fact that you have opted to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest. In our last program, we took a look at what many regard as the greatest excitement Speightstown has witnessed since the invasion of 1652. That, of course, being the political theatrics of the two by-elections of 1984. In today's program, we will look at one of the physical jewels to be found in Speightstown's crown.
Now, one of the queens of Speightstown, if you want to call it that, is Arlington House here. And Carl will outline the work that has been done over the years to ensure the preservation of this very distinctive building, not only to Speightstown but to Barbados. Earlier I talked about the fact that in the 17th century and even before that, in Britain, you had these narrow houses facing onto the street so that they could make maximum use of being on the main street, and then the main body of the building extended into the backyards beyond.
Now, don't be fooled into thinking that the entire house was all that met the eye right here at the front. They were narrow at the front, and deliberately so for a special reason, as Paul Altman explains.
And the tax that was paid in accordance to the amount of space that these buildings took up facing the street. So if you had a wider frontage on the street, you paid a higher tax. But you could achieve the same objective by having a narrow frontage on the street, by creating the balconies and inner gardens and so on. So the feeling was one that was a signature type of design, the single house.
And this is a fine example of a very early house. You would have found many of these around Bridgetown in the 17th century. And here, this, as Carl will probably tell you, has been extended up into North America as the Barbadian settlers moved into the Carolinas.
In the 1990s, CBC TV presented a series of programs titled Treasures of Barbados. One of those programs focused on Speightstown. Then Dr. Fraser, now Senator Professor Henry Fraser, was the presenter.
Arlington, the old health centre, is certainly one of the earliest and one of the most important houses in Speightstown. It's very much a medieval type of house, tall and narrow, and gabled with a third-floor attic and gable windows. It's typical of the 17th century townhouses we know once existed in Bridgetown, and like the single house described by Ligon in 1650. It is in fact the very dimension, 22 feet wide, of Ligon's recommended house design, although it tapers to the back like many medieval houses, and has a very medieval feature, a stair hall at the back on the right in this picture. It's a single room wide with a shop on the ground floor and a grand street entrance. It was probably a ship chandler's or outfitter's, and the owners, the Skinner family, had their own jetty outside. There's an upstairs entrance to the drawing room above, with verandas down the long side to the garden, now destroyed. It's now the Lion's Den for the north. The gateway and staircase is a very grand feature and is the best example of a typical Speightstown outside staircase. Arlington closely resembles the single houses of Charleston. Bajans were largely responsible for settling Charleston, many from the Speightstown area. And Bimshire was in fact, if not the mother colony, then the foster mother of the Carolinas from 1670 for the next 100 years.
So we see very interesting combination of material and designs here that we see elsewhere in Speightstown. The narrow veranda, in this case facing not along the street, but inside along a narrow inland yard. And then up on top we see the dormer windows that provide an extra room up in the attic. And the patterns of early Barbadian architecture are very clearly defined in this building. And Carl, I know that you and many others were very responsible and involved in maintaining this building and restoring it.
Well, yes, this is a National Trust building, and as you pointed out, it's one of our gems. And we saved it because it was actually slated for possible demolition.
Thankfully, the building was not demolished. Businessman Paul Altman was instrumental in saving this gem of Speightstown.
I was told by some person at the time who I respected, and that person said to me, you know, Arlington has outlived its useful time. And my response was, what do you do with your grandmother when she gets older? She may have outlived her useful time. You can't restore her, but you have to respect her. And with a building, you can restore it. So you have the added opportunity with a building. No building, in my opinion, ever outlives its useful time. I believe that there is room for new architecture, for something that is modern. But where you have historical towns and historical buildings, you have an obligation, as you do with your grandmother, to do whatever is right. And the obligation with buildings is to try to capture and recapture the quality of what was there.
An interesting analogy there. Aware of its importance on history's page, including its links with South Carolina,
we felt that the house needed to be saved. And we had many discussions with the National Bank at that time. And finally, we were able to come to the understanding that we would try to raise the money to restore Arlington House. And we were very lucky. The economies were a little bit more vibrant in those days. And we were able to go to one individual, which is the Rousing Foundation. The Rousings have properties in Barbados. They're well-known people. And they were able to fund most of the restoration, so we were able to achieve that.
And when the now Republic Bank, the old Barbados National Bank, was being constructed, they dug out around Arlington House. And Arlington House, like all the early 18th or late 17th century structures, was built without a foundation. It is there floating on the surface itself. It has absolutely no foundation whatsoever. In the excavations around, a number of interesting features. I came down and archaeology should have been done here, but it was not, sadly. But from the fill excavated, I was able to determine that, first of all, this was an Arawak site going through many of the Arawak cultures, because it contained early solidoid materials, it contained trumasoid, and it contained swazoid materials. And then from the material that had been dug out and surreptitiously dumped elsewhere, I was able, for example, to retrieve ceramic artifacts that clearly had an early 17th century date, including early pipe stems, pipe bowls, etc. So this spot has been continuously occupied for thousands and thousands of years.
Now, that's a point that is often overlooked by many when we consider the early history of Barbados. And so the building was preserved. Then CBC reporter Robert Goddard reported back then on the efforts at restoring and preserving the building.
The first part, already completed, was the spraying of the timber inside Arlington to control termites. The second and third parts of the refurbishing, which are still going on, are a cleanup of the garden and the application of a new coat of paint to the outside of the building. Arlington House is considered important because of the possible architectural links it provides with similar houses in the southern United States. In particular, architectural experts point to Arlington's 3 stories, single room width, and a main entrance on the side of the house as evidence of the link between houses in Speightstown and South Carolina. The National Trust and the U.S. Peace Corps expect the refurbishing of Arlington House to take another 3 weekends of work. But there are concerns about how the maintenance of the house will be financed after the renovations. The present tenants, Lions Club North, use only one of the rooms, and without the help of other community groups or the government, the continued upkeep of this historic building may yet be in doubt. Robert Goddard, World Scene.
And then I enjoyed getting involved. I worked with a crew of small contractors who I had done other projects with, and spent many days, weeks, months, and maybe even years because it took a number of years to finish Arlington House and to get it done in the right way. So I guess that I'm proud to be able to sit here now and say, well, I made my little contribution by raising the funds to restore Arlington House.
And so this gem of a building here, one of the many treasures in historic Speightstown, was given a second chance at life. Now, what do you do when you have been successfully resuscitated? Paul Altman explains.
Now then, once you saved the house, you then had to decide what you were going to do with it. So we were able to save Arlington House, and the two options that faced us as choices for the use of Arlington House was an interpretive centre or an interactive museum. Now, the interpretive centre idea was a great idea, and in my opinion, that we lost the opportunity to make Arlington into an interpretive centre. And the idea of an interpretive centre is that if you were going to restore the town, you had to lead by example, and we had done so. We had led by example by restoring and anchoring Arlington House as the centerpiece of the town. Of course, the church cannot be overlooked as the centerpiece, but Arlington, apart from a church, you know, as a business residence type of place.
Now, prior to its development, there was an act of Parliament that considered 5 areas in Barbados for special development, and that act offered incentives to anyone who sought to bring about the type of development encouraged by the act.
Speightstown is obviously one of those. The Bay Street area, the East Coast area, St. Lawrence, there are a number, so there are 5 areas. And with the Special Development Area Act, there was a package of incentives. So anybody that would come or own a property or buy a property or do anything to help the town would have tax concessions, duty-free concessions. And this is the key thing if you want to get work done, if you want to push from a development point of view and make it happen, you have to give business people and property owners special incentives and packages of incentives. So we had the full set of package of ideas. We had the interpretive centre idea, but for whatever reason, that did not happen. And then we had to come up with the second choice idea, which was the one of an interactive museum, or a museum idea. Now, as it turns out, at the time I was also restoring the synagogue in Bridgetown and building a museum in Bridgetown next to the synagogue, and had visited Boston in the United States and gone to see a museum there that was very sort of made an impact on me, and it was an interactive museum. And the idea of an interactive museum is that museums, by definition, people think of buildings that would have old pieces in them, artifacts, things that you gathered that you could put on show. But interactive museums didn't have all of the artifacts. They may have one or two or a few scattered, but mostly what interactive museums did was that they had things that would be attractive to people, and maybe even more especially to younger people. Although older people and younger people, I'm not sure where that line begins and ends. They tend to blend into one. So we then created the interactive museum. We did one in Bridgetown next to the synagogue, and the same people who were based in Canada, in Montreal, came here and helped us to assemble the museum that we have here today at Arlington. I think, so the summary statement is that we are very proud to have been able to restore Arlington. We are proud to know that it is one of our selection of museums in Barbados, because Barbados has a wonderful set of museums for people to learn about that history of what this island is about. And the story at Arlington is the story of not only the story and history of Speightstown, how the town was evolved over time, but it's also the story of what made Barbados the success that it was as a country, that small country that had great riches linked to rum, linked to sugar, and linked to business development. So that's the story that's told at Arlington. And I know many people come here, but never enough. We think that this is a sort of exciting spot that needs to attract more people from Barbados and visitors, but I think of it more as being a story to be told to people and children that are in school. I can't imagine if I had a museum like this when I was at school here as a young fellow, and some people brought me to a place like Arlington. I went to the old museum at the Garrison, and you know, of course, as a child you get bored very quickly looking at all of these objects, but here something jumps and talks to you. And I'm not decrying the main museum. I think that is very important and it's much more sophisticated, but this is more in your face, exciting, and it keeps you moving, it keeps you thinking, it wakes you up.
So we have now a very interesting series of interactive museums in Arlington House. As I pointed out, it is a National Trust property, and each floor tells a different story relating to the history of Speightstown, its relationship with the sugar producing interior, the history of the crafts that dominated the sugar period. Today's generation, of course, is ignorant of things like ironsmiths, tinsmiths, blacksmiths, farriers, coopers, all of these trades that even in my youth were very much a part and parcel of the fabric of life in a town such as Speightstown. Now, technology has changed and all these old trades have disappeared, and in the present day mind of the young aren't even acknowledged, aren't even recognized.
Now, those trades and special skills are brought alive right here in the Arlington House Museum. So in a sense, you will find the artifacts of yesterday's trade, industry and commerce that were representative of the entire island, and of course, right here in historic Speightstown. Now, Edward Sampson is the manager of the Arlington House Museum. A tour of this museum is a walk back in time in historic Speightstown.
Welcome to Arlington House Museum. This house is actually 300 years old, and it was occupied by a generation of Skinners by family name for 200 years. The Skinner family were very prosperous merchants. They were ship chandlers, and this ground floor in which you're standing in was the ship chandlery, where they kept the spare parts for the boats that came in during that era.
With the departure of the Skinners, the building was used as a health center. In an earlier program, Reynold McLean recalled memories of receiving medical attention right here in this building. In 1953, the late Princess Margaret visited the building on an official visit to the island.
Arlington House was officially opened on February 25th, 2008. Before that, in 1950, this very house was the first health center where people came from all over to see the doctor and the dentist. The walls of the house are all natural coral stone and was put together in those days with lime, sand, and molasses. Sometimes they use eggs and stout. Now we kept the concept of the 17th century look with the old-fashioned windows called jealousy windows that were letting light in here. And behind 6 of these jealousy windows, we have an audio-visual display where you see the potter, the shoemaker, women of trade, the shopkeeper, and businessmen.
Now, these occupations were and still remain features of historic Speightstown. Individuals who performed these roles were identified by the many guests who participated in and shared their experiences in earlier programs. In today's Speightstown, you will find the cobbler. In fact, you'll find cobblers, women of trade, the shopkeeper, and of course, businessmen and women.
By taking the little audio stick up and pushing on the white button, you can hear the vendors and as they interact with their trades. You're actually welcome as you come in through the door by a coconut vendor and display on the roof of our museum. If I can draw your attention to this painting on the wall, this is the painting of Arlington before it was actually restored in 2000. Now we have a very close connection with the Carolinas in that the first 7 governors of Carolina were all Barbadians. It's believed that the last inhabitants of the house was around the 1940s.
This room is called Speightstown Memories. It introduces visitors to the lives of the island's colonial settlers.
And you're actually walking on a 1747 Emmanuel Boeing map of Barbados. This map is fully detailed, in which all the names on the map were all landowners, and they were all eligible to vote once they had owned 10 acres of land or more during that time. Just around on this side, the little black squares, these were all forts that the British had set up in event of any uprising or invasion of the French, Spanish, and Portuguese who were trying to invade Barbados, as we were the only island in the Caribbean that wasn't subject to invasion.
Now, the forts of concern to this program were those on the coast, starting at Maycox in the north, all the way down to Dover Fort on the southern side of Speightstown. Those forts, I'm sure you would recall, they were detailed for us in a previous program by Ambassador Bobby Morris.
Over here we have some blocks, and they all have an inscription at the back where you can actually turn and read about, this is all about Speightstown. Over this side we have about the 5 jetties at Speightstown. There were 5 jetties into Speightstown around 1919. So the one that you see there, back there by Fisherman's Pub, that's a new jetty. Over on that side we have a house Speightstown got its name from a William Speight, and he was a local landowner and a member of Barbados First General Assembly in 1639. Of course, there's a picture over in black and white around 1800s, how our houses were in Speightstown, with the lovely galleries overlooking the street. But there were lots of these houses were destroyed in a fire of the early 1800s. And of course we have Mr. Maskell on the audio. He tells you all about the good old days in Speightstown. And again, as I mentioned downstairs, the ballast bricks, which were known as fire bricks, that made a brick oven for cooking in those early days. And of course they came into making nice chimneys for the factories when we were fully into sugar.
Now, this room is called Plantation Memories. It illustrates a few aspects of the influence of colonization, the plantation system, and how sugarcane dotted the island's landscape.
You have a feel as though you walked into a cane field. We have 8 of these static displays on the floor, 6 of which are audio. We take you through to the front of the room where we started a show on the main screen on how Barbados was formed being a coral island.
Strong seismic activity continued to thrust this coral mass further out in the ocean, with the most recent and final push occurring just 60,000 years ago, a mere blink of an eye in geological terms. No other coral island in the entire world has been formed in this extraordinary manner.
After which you see a video presentation on these 4 screens with 2 slaves and 2 plantation owners talking about slavery and plantocracy. And after that, the entire room is yours to view some exhibits, listen to some audios, and do some reading about slavery and plantocracy and things like that.
With its many jetties, Speightstown was a thriving shipping port. In an earlier program, Peggy McGarry and Pastor Carl Richards shared memories of the commercial activities that occurred around the jetties. We have entered Wharf Memories. This room presents a talking pirate recalling the importance of Speightstown as a leading port and trading hub.
This was the attic of the house where the Skinner children slept. We've actually changed it into a wharf-like feel where we have some barrels, and so you have a feel as though you're on a pier or a jetty. We have a virtual turtle and fish that swims around. There's a sand screen displaying images of early Bridgetown trading. We've actually tried to make it more look sort of like a beach with some driftwood and some shells and so on. And of course we have images portrayed on that sand screen of early Bridgetown trading. Now this sand screen has not been seen in many museums around the world, so it's quite new to us. Over there we have a scale that tells your true weight in pounds and kilos. As you stand on the scale and your weight comes up, you slide the little white bar up and it calculates your value in sugarcane. There's a ship's hand. You can sail virtually all through the islands of the Caribbean, all the way down to South America.
This is quite fascinating indeed. I have sailed from historic Speightstown and I have landed in Roseau, Dominica.
Over here we have a flying fish display. Speightstown was a whalery in 1912. And of course we have a barrel that gives the feel of a 250-kilometer wind and the sound of the wind during a hurricane. There's a currency converter. So what you do here is you actually read a question, work the maths out and touch on the answer that you think is incorrectly converted. And of course the question remains the same but the answer changes. And of course, last but not least, we have a pirate by the name of Speightstown. He's a very, very lifelike. And he tells a story about his piracy during the Caribbean.
From months on end, we were capturing vessels and spreading terror in the Caribbean Sea and along the New England coast. Bonnet even forged an alliance with the terrible Blackbeard.
Now, Speightstown was a true Barbadian pirate. And of course, after his marriage went bad, he bought his own boat, had 10 cannon aboard, and he was the first pirate to pay his crew a salary. He joined forces with another bad pirate by the name of Edward Teach, alias Blackbeard, who invented walking the plank. And they were both caught and hung in Charleston in South Carolina. On his gravestone in Battlestone Park, it says, "The Gentleman Pirate."
There's only one approach that I know, and that is to do it the right way. Arlington has been done the right way. And that's why it will stand the test of time as we go forward. It will take continued sort of maintenance and handling a few things correctly. But the real core of this building will always be respected as a quality building. And Arlington then ought to be used more, and I look forward to some additional things happening here to keep that inspiration going.
Well, thankfully, the artifacts of historic Speightstown are well preserved right here in the Arlington House Museum, ensuring that this town does not become a forgotten treasure.
And let's hope that this program does something at least to A, inform people about the historical nature of Speightstown, B, about the sad state of the town at the present moment in time, and C, that all is not lost, that Speightstown is waiting its regeneration, its rebirth, and that once again Speightstown will thrive and be the jewel of the north of Barbados.
An interesting point on which we end this week's program, for that is exactly where we shall begin next week as we start our look towards the possible future of historic Speightstown. I'm Sherwood McCaskey.